They thought humiliating me in front of my coworkers would break me, revoking my badge mid-lunch, marching me out while my half-eaten sandwich was still on the desk I'd built their empire from. What they didn't know was that the very system they used to lock me out was designed by me. And once I was gone, the same doors that shut in my face would trap them inside their own lies. This is the story of how arrogance collapsed an entire company in front of millions. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button. You'll want to hear how this unfolds. They didn't wait until the end of the day, or even the end of the week. It happened in the middle of lunch. One moment I was at the cafeteria table, scrolling through emails and sipping a coffee that was already going cold, and the next moment, two men from security were standing over me with that blank, uncomfortable expression that tells everyone within sight what's happening. "Claire Donovan, you'll need to come with us," one of them said quietly. But quiet wasn't enough to soften the blow. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. I could feel the eyes of half the floor on me as I stood, leaving behind a half-eaten sandwich and 3 years of service like they were nothing. Tracy Collins from HR scurried in behind them, holding a cardboard box like a grim prop. She didn't even look me in the eye as she announced, "Your position has been terminated, effective immediately. Your badge access has been disabled." Just like that. Stripped of identity, stripped of dignity, with a single sentence. My badge, the little piece of plastic that had opened every door in this building, that represented my authority and my work, was now useless. The turnstile beeped red when I tried to leave through the front gate, forcing security to manually override it while my colleagues watched in silence. That was the real humiliation, and I know that's what Mark Reynolds, the CFO, had wanted. He wanted me paraded through the lobby, powerless, with nothing but a cardboard box in my arms and whispers chasing me all the way to the sidewalk. He thought it would crush me, just as he had crushed others who crossed him. But what no one in that building seemed to remember was this. I had been the one who designed the badge system in the first place. Every elevator restriction, every executive garage lock, every glass door security panel, they all carried lines of code I had written. Code that I had quietly reinforced with a hidden safeguard. For years, they had treated me as invisible, a back-office technician who kept things running without recognition. That invisibility was about to become my weapon. As Tracy shoved the HR paperwork at me and turned away with obvious relief, I kept my face perfectly neutral. Inside, though, I knew this was the beginning of something they could never control. They believed they had locked me out. In reality, they had just locked themselves in. The walk from the glass doors of that building to the street outside felt endless, but I didn't flinch. The humiliation was loud, but inside my head there was only silence, a silence sharpened into focus. They thought removing me was a clean cut, but what they couldn't see was the fuse already lit beneath their feet. Years earlier, when I'd been tasked with modernizing the company's entire access control network, I'd buried a safeguard so deep no one else even knew it existed. It wasn't sabotage, not in the illegal sense. It was insurance, a quiet fail-safe to protect the system from outside tampering or unauthorized overrides. At least, that's how I described it on paper. In reality, it meant that the moment my credentials were revoked, a chain reaction would begin. The executives' badges, Mark Reynolds, Linda Harper, every one of them, were tied directly to mine. If I lost access, so would they. It was subtle at first. A slight delay when they tried to scan into the garage. An elevator that suddenly required a manual reset. A server room that flashed red and refused entry for a few seconds before unlocking again. Nothing big enough to raise alarms, but enough for me to know the system was listening. I had given it instructions years ago, and now it was simply following orders. I didn't need to send emails or make calls. I didn't need to warn them. That would have spoiled everything. My weapon was silence, And silence was the one thing they could never anticipate. Mark always assumed threats came with noise, with shouting, with confrontation, with evidence he could twist and spin into compliance. But there would be nothing for him to fight against, no enemy he could corner, just a creeping, invisible loss of control. As I walked to the train station with that box of useless office trinkets in my hands, I wasn't defeated. I was patient. Every red light on a badge reader that week would carry my fingerprint, even though I was nowhere near the building. That was the beauty of it. I didn't have to lift a finger. They had already triggered the collapse themselves. The first cracks appeared the very next morning, though to everyone else they looked like nothing more than another Monday headache. I woke up earlier than usual, brewed coffee, and sat by my window scrolling through the news as though my life hadn't just been gutted in front of the entire office. But I wasn't watching the headlines. I was watching the company's internal message boards that I still had passive access to through an overlooked permissions trail. IT chatter, employee complaints. Small things at first. Elevators stalling again. Anyone else's badge not working this morning? Garage arm won't lift. Parking backed up onto Main Street. Individually, it was just noise. Together, it was the first sign that the fuse I'd left behind was burning exactly as planned. By 10 a.m., the CFO, Mark Reynolds, was pacing the executive floor with his usual impatience, snapping at IT staff to fix the damn glitches, while he fumbled with a badge that only blinked red when he tried to open the server room. He didn't know that the lockouts were rotating on a timed schedule, making it appear random but inevitable. His team would troubleshoot for hours, think they'd solve the issue, and then another door would deny him. It was death by 1,000 cuts, every inconvenience stacking on top of the one before. The employees noticed too. When a VP couldn't get into her own office and had to sit in the open cubicle farm among the same staff she'd ignored for years, whispers spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, the story had moved from irritation to entertainment. Screens lit up with group chats trading jokes about executives stranded in stairwells or waiting helplessly by doors until a facilities worker came by with a manual override key. They called it the corporate safari, watching the predators wander around, lost and confused in their own territory. Meanwhile, Mark grew angrier by the hour. I knew his type. For years, I had watched him build his reputation on intimidation and theatrics, berating people until they either quit or folded. But intimidation only works when you have control. Strip that away, and what's left is a man in an expensive suit, sweating as junior employees film him jamming his badge at a locked glass door. I could almost hear his voice in my head. This company runs because of me. Not anymore. Now it was running without him. Or more accurately, it was grinding to a halt with him stuck outside. I didn't interfere. I didn't send anonymous tips or fan the flames. That wasn't necessary. The system was doing exactly what I had built it to do. Slowly, methodically undercut their authority until everyone in that building saw the truth. They weren't untouchable. They weren't powerful. They were just people who relied on doors opening when they waved a piece of plastic. And those doors now answered to me, even in my absence. By the end of that day, the message boards were lit up with frustration. Facilities blamed IT. It blamed unforeseen glitches. The executives blamed everyone. But the employees? They laughed. And laughter is contagious. Once respect cracks into ridicule, there's no patch strong enough to hold it together. This was only the beginning, and they didn't even know it yet. By the third day, the inconvenience had grown into paralysis, and the mood inside the building shifted from irritation to something darker, a gnawing panic that no one wanted to name out loud. It started with a board meeting that never happened because the entire executive floor sealed itself shut. Every glass door that usually slid open with a confident swipe of a badge now blinked red, locking the company's most powerful people in the hallway like trespassers in their own empire. Mark Reynolds was first to notice, slamming his badge against the sensor until his hand turned red, demanding that IT respond immediately. But IT couldn't. They weren't in control anymore. I was. And I didn't even need to touch a keyboard to remind them. In their minds, this was still a glitch, an error that would be resolved once the right consultant was brought in. But what they failed to realize was that every consultant they called would run into the same brick wall. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was meant to, and every hour they wasted made them look weaker to the staff who once feared them. By lunchtime, employees on the lower floors were openly enjoying the spectacle. Executive assistants wandered back down with trays of untouched catering because the CEO and CFO couldn't get into the private dining room. VPs begged junior staffers to let them through, even though everyone knew the badge readers were automated and could only be reset through the master terminal, my terminal, the one now sitting untouched in my apartment drawer. The same people who once sneered at the so-called back-office techs were now begging those same techs to fix it or lose your job. But the techs couldn't. The executives were discovering that power built on delegation crumbles when the delegated are powerless too. By mid-afternoon, desperation set in. Mark tried to hold an emergency huddle in the open-plan cubicles, standing red-faced under fluorescent lights with dozens of employees staring at him like an animal cornered in a zoo. He barked orders, promising bonuses, threatening lawsuits. But it was useless. Without access to the server room, the financial reports couldn't be finalized. Without access to the garage, they couldn't leave without waiting for security escorts. Without access to their private offices, they were stripped of the illusion of superiority. Every minute of lockout turned them into a joke, a spectacle whispered about in group chats, filmed discreetly on phones, and shared across the company like wildfire. Respect wasn't just gone, it was rotting in front of them. On the fourth day, the system hardened into full lockdown. Elevators froze between floors, stairwell doors jammed shut from both sides, and the executive suite became an aquarium. Glass walls filled with suits pacing like restless fish, powerless to escape. Linda Harper, the CEO, tried to project calm, insisting this was a temporary malfunction, but even she couldn't hide her panic when her calls to the investors went unanswered because her phone had been left inside her locked office. Staff who once lowered their voices when she passed now walked by openly, smirking, enjoying the rare sight of their leaders humbled. I didn't gloat out loud. I didn't need to. The collapse was unfolding exactly as I'd designed, quiet, relentless, undeniable. Their world was built on the illusion of seamless control. Doors opening, systems responding, staff obeying. And I had pulled a single thread that unraveled it all. From my small apartment across town, I watched as reports trickled onto public forums. Executives stranded, IT flailing, productivity dropping to zero. The building that once symbolized their dominance had turned into a glass prison, and they were the inmates. They thought firing me stripped me of power. Instead, it stripped them of cover. The lockout wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. For the first time in their careers, the doors didn't open just because they wanted them to. And that realization was only the beginning of their fall. The fifth day was supposed to be their victory lap, the carefully choreographed quarterly investor presentation that would broadcast live across the country. The one chance to convince shareholders, analysts, and the press that everything was under control and the company was stronger than ever. Linda Harper had rehearsed every word, Mark Reynolds had massaged every number, and the stage had been polished to a shine. But at 9 a.m., when investors began filing into the building expecting handshakes and small talk, they instead found the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar firm pounding her badge against a stubborn door like a frustrated tenant locked out of her own apartment. Cameras captured everything. Linda's forced smile, Mark's sweat-slicked forehead, the IT staff frantically tapping on tablets that did nothing, the red light flashing again and again on the glass doors of the executive suite. And above it all, a giant countdown timer ticked towards 0, promising the start of a live stream presentation that no one inside the building could control. When the clock hit 0, the feed switched to the stage, but no one walked out. For 30 unbearable seconds, there was only silence, the empty podium framed by spotlights, the audience murmuring. Then a stagehand darted across the screen, clearly panicked, before vanishing again. Investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats while employees watching online whispered in disbelief. Finally, Linda stormed in from a side stairwell security had pried open, straightened her blazer, and tried to act as if nothing had happened. She began reading from the teleprompter, her voice brittle but steady, announcing record profits and unprecedented growth. For a moment, she almost looked in control again, until the slides behind her began to flicker. The numbers they had fabricated, the smooth projections Mark had insisted would calm the market, suddenly shifted. I had embedded the true figures in the system years ago as part of the failsafe, and now they were surfacing line by line in 20-foot-high letters. Losses where there should have been profits, debt where there should have been surplus, contracts marked terminated instead of renewed. The illusion crumbled in front of millions. Linda faltered, her words choking in her throat, and Mark rushed forward, hissing into her ear. But the microphone caught it all. "Cut the feed! Shut it down now!" he shouted, his voice shaking. But nothing shut down. Investors began standing, some already on their phones as the company's stock price nosedived in real time. One after another, they walked out, not even pretending to listen, while the live stream chat exploded with messages. Fraud. Sell now. SEC incoming. Employees sitting in the audience filmed on their phones, some laughing, some too stunned to speak, but none moved to help. Respect had evaporated, and in its place was ridicule. Watching from my apartment, I could see the empire unraveling, faster than even I had imagined. Years of arrogance, of intimidation, of lies wrapped in polished slides had been exposed in a single broadcast. By the time Linda stumbled off stage with Mark trailing after her, their company was finished. The stock had crashed, the investors were gone, and the humiliation had gone viral, viewed by millions across the country within minutes. And all I had done was nothing. No hacking, no leaks, no speeches. I had simply let the system run exactly as I had designed it. They triggered their own collapse the moment they decided to fire me, and now the world had seen the truth. The day after the live stream disaster, the company's name was plastered across every news channel, analysts dissecting every frame of Linda's panic and Mark's outburst. But the real blow came when federal investigators showed up unannounced. The SEC didn't ask permission. They walked straight past the reception desk with court orders in hand. Employees lined the halls, silent witnesses as the same executives who once barked orders now stumbled over excuses. Linda tried to call it a technical malfunction. Mark waved revised spreadsheets like bandages on a gunshot wound, but the investigators weren't interested in stories. They demanded server access, raw data, and audit trails that couldn't be rewritten. Those doors that had once sealed the executives away from accountability now sealed their fraud inside, waiting to be pried open by government hands. By mid-afternoon, trading was halted, all executive bonuses frozen, and outside the building protesters gathered with signs calling for resignations. Watching from my apartment, I didn't need to say a word. I hadn't hacked, leaked, or plotted beyond the quiet safeguard I had coded years earlier. The company wasn't being undone by me. It was being undone by the truth that could no longer be hidden. They had built their empire on arrogance and deception, and with a single failed badge swipe, the collapse became inevitable. In the end, I didn't need revenge that screamed. I needed revenge that whispered. They fired me thinking they had stripped me of power, but all they did was trigger the collapse I had built into their own walls. I never lifted a finger after leaving, never sent a threat or demanded justice. The system exposed them, the SEC buried them, and the world laughed at them. For me, it was enough. Silence became my weapon, patience my strategy, and arrogance their executioner. They locked me out, but in truth, they had only locked themselves in forever. They thought stripping me of my badge would erase me, but what they really erased was their own illusion of power. When they marched me out of that building in front of my coworkers, they believed humiliation would end me. Instead, it became the spark that burned their empire to the ground. When I look back on what happened, I realize this story isn't just about corporate revenge. It's about the quiet ways power can be built, protected, and eventually revealed. My revenge wasn't a dramatic speech or a furious outburst. It was patience, foresight, and the understanding that arrogance always collapses on itself. For years, I had been treated like a replaceable cog in the system, overlooked, ignored, and underestimated. What my former bosses didn't realize was that the so-called invisible people, the ones who keep the systems running, the ones who don't shout the loudest, often hold the real leverage. All it takes is the right moment, and the mask slips. The deeper lesson is that in life, you don't always have to fight back with noise or confrontation. Sometimes the strongest response is silence. By staying calm, by refusing to react on their terms, I allowed the truth to speak for itself. In workplaces, in friendships, even in family dynamics, we often feel the pressure to prove ourselves immediately, to shout over the lies or demand recognition. But power built on desperation rarely lasts. Real strength comes from preparation, from knowing your worth, and from letting arrogance undo itself. The final moral is simple. Revenge doesn't have to be loud or cruel. It doesn't have to destroy everything. It just has to be enough for those who wronged you to face the consequences of their own actions. For me, that meant watching their empire collapse, not because I tore it down, but because I stopped holding it up. And that's a lesson worth carrying into every part of life. How to get started today. Write down where you feel undervalued. Awareness is the first step. Build small systems of leverage in your own life, whether it's saving money, documenting your work, or strengthening your network. Practice silence instead of reaction. Sometimes holding back speaks louder than words. Remember, your preparation today could be your power tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your experiences, subscribe for more stories like this, and let's keep building a community where silence, preparation, and integrity speak louder than arrogance.